Hey, fifth graders, Mr. Mortz here. I'm going to be doing the reading, and I want you to follow along with me because I'm actually going to skip some parts on chapter two. And if you didn't read already in the description of the video, the reading starts on page 15. So please open up to that. We are going to start learning about Native Americans, tribes in Iowa, just to start with American history. Chapter one is about like ancient thousands and millions of years ago history, and it's primarily about geography of Iowa, which, from my understanding, you've learned a little bit about in the past, and I think third grade. But the important thing to know with Iowa's geography is as the glaciers were moving through and melting, it left behind this really rich soil that became our prairies, and prairies have very rich soil. So, anyways, just getting to chapter two. Um, like I said, you should be on page 15, and I'm just going to start reading away. So, from the top, the story of the people who lived in what is now called Iowa goes back for thousands of years. Many different American Indian groups have hunted on the prairies and in the woodlands and planted gardens along the rivers and streams. Well, each tribe had its own way of doing some things. They were alike in many ways. American Indians got their food by hunting and growing food. They built shelters against the cold winters and learned the best ways to survive the changing seasons. The state got its name from the Iowa tribe, and many places in Iowa have taken their names from American Indians. For example, several counties are named for other Indian tribes: Sioux, Winnebago, Potawatomi, and Sac. Others are called after Indian chiefs like Black Hawk, Keokuk, Appanoose, and Poweshiek. The names of many Iowa rivers, cities, and towns are also Indian words. So, a little fun fact there, everybody. A lot of our state's names, like it said, whether it's counties, cities, whatever it may be, come from Native American tribes and individuals. Next one, the earliest people in Iowa. The very earliest people in what became Iowa left no writings to tell about themselves. Most of what we know comes from finding artifacts, things they made, such as a small piece of a clay pot or a decorated shell that was part of a necklace. A pile of rocks might mark the spot of an ancient campfire. Archaeologists who study these artifacts believe that human beings lived in North America for over 20,000 years. For 12,000 of those years, there have been people in Iowa. These first Iowans lived in small groups and hunted large animals such as giant buffalo and woolly mammoths. A sort of small elephant with shaggy brown hair. These Indian groups were nomads, people with no permanent homes, who followed the animals that supplied their food. At that time, just after the ice had retreated, the Iowa climate was cooler than it is today. The winters were long and bitter, and the summers short and cool. Around 9,000 years ago, however, the climate warmed up so that more plants grew. While the early people continued to hunt large game for food and skins, they also began to gather nuts, seeds, fruits, and berries. This gave them more food than they had in the past. About this time, also, they learned how to weave fibers from plants to make cloth. In the winter, they built houses out of rocks or shelters of brush and skins. To keep themselves warm, they also made tools from stone and bone, one of the oldest items ever discovered. In the state, and a small flute made from the bone of a bird, found in northwest Iowa near the city of Cherokee. In northeast Iowa, some Indian groups piled huge mounds of dirt into the shapes of sacred animals, such as bears, buffalo, snakes, or birds. When members of tribes died, they were buried in mounds. The mound builders may have been the first to plant small gardens. At the same time they continued to gather food from forests, these Indians also molded pots from clay. Baking the pot for several hours in a hot fire made the clay hard enough to be used for cooking stews and storing food. Because each group had its own shapes and decorations for pots, archaeologists sometimes identify early peoples by their pottery. So, one thing you probably know about Native American tribes in general, everybody throughout our country, is they used the environment for everything. Homes they made, clothes, everything. The environment was the Native Americans' life source. That is how they lived. And those pictures show you that. So, anyways, going back to the reading, next section, the first farmers. About 1,000 years ago, new American Indian groups began moving into this area. They came up the Mississippi from the south, settled in the river valleys, and lived in large villages in the forests. In the spring, the women planted gardens of beans, squash, and corn. They were the first to discover that corn grows well in the rich Iowa soil. Some American tribes regarded the garden plants as children of Mother Earth. Because the women took care of the children of the tribe, they also cared for Mother Earth's children, young plants. Indian men, the hunters, were not allowed to work in the gardens. Corn was the most important crop. It grew first in Mexico, but as American Indians moved north up the Mississippi River, they brought corn with them. The women pounded or ground it to make cornmeal for bread, cooked it in stew pots with meat, or roasted ears at their feasts. So there's a fun fact, everybody, that I actually didn't know before I read this, was corn originated in Mexico, and what is now Mexico. During the winter, the Indians lived in houses made of willow poles and elm bark with a small hole in the roof to let the smoke escape. In their houses, they stored food, tools, and extra clothing. A tribe lived for several years on the same site. These people were not nomads. They left for the hunt but returned to the same spot each spring to plant their gardens. One tribe who lived like this was the Iowa tribe, for whom the state is named. Next section, the traders come. In 1676, a small band of Iowa visited a French trading post at Green Bay, Wisconsin. That sounds like a really nice city as a side note, probably has a really good football team. The Iowa traded animal skins for iron kettles, glass beads, knives, and cloth, things that they could not make for themselves. In 1685, a French explorer named Nicolas Perrot visited an Iowa village on the upper Iowa River. They held a feast in his honor, and Perrot wrote that the Iowa treated him very well. The traders brought change to the Iowa's lives. The Indians acquired many items that made their lives easier. Soon they were hunting with guns rather than bows and arrows, and cutting up their meat with metal knives. The women cooked stews in iron pots. They traded for colorful glass beads to decorate their new cloths of cotton cloth. Like other tribes, the Iowa once had made everything they used. Now they came to depend on trade with the Europeans. Because the American Indians needed the skins to trade, hunting became even more important. They killed more animals than ever before to get more skins. As a result, the animals became scarce and the tribes needed to find new hunting lands. This sometimes created trouble and led to battles among tribes for control of good hunting lands. So that was a big way that the arrival of the Europeans, the French, the English, the Spanish changed Native Americans' lives in Iowa. Was they needed more goods to trade with the Europeans because the Europeans had goods that the Native Americans could not make themselves or didn't have. Anyways, going back to the reading, because of these struggles, two new tribes came, and this Iowa tribe account on the next page, everybody, on page 22 and 23, I'm not going to read. They talk about the Iowa a little bit in the video you're going to watch, so we're actually going to skip over these two pages, but you're welcome to read that on your own later. So anyways, going to page 24 and 25. Into eastern Iowa, the Sauk and Meskwaki, the Sauk or Sac, had once lived in northern Michigan. The Meskwaki, sometimes called the Fox by the whites, were driven south from the Fox River in Wisconsin. Together they drove away the Illinois Indians and settled along the Mississippi and I'm not going to try to pronounce that, everybody. From there, they controlled the hunting grounds in western Illinois and eastern Iowa. The largest Sauk village, Saukanook, was on the east side of the Mississippi River at the mouth of the Rock River. At one time, several thousand people lived there, fishing in the rivers and gathering nuts, berries, and fruit from the forest. The women planted large gardens of beans, pumpkins, and squash and tended hundreds of acres of corn. Black Hawk, a Sauk chief, remembered Saukanook as a good place to live. Quote, "We had plenty. We always had plenty. Our children never cried from hunger, neither were our people in want. The rapids of Rock River furnished us with an abundance of fish, and the land being very fertile, never failed to produce good crops." End quote. In midsummer, most of the Sauk left Saukanook for a hunt for buffalo and elk to the west across Iowa. When they returned, there was feasting on the meat and fresh corn from the garden. The men and boys raced horses, played games, and bartered with the traders for supplies. The women wove mats and dried food from the garden to store in deep pits for the winter. In the late fall, the Sauk left their winter homes. They took some food and buried the rest. When the cold weather was over, the tribe returned to Saukanook, dug up the food stores, and began planting for the next harvest. The Sauk tribe was divided into groups of several families called clans. Each clan had a name, like the bear, the thunder, or the buffalo. It was important in religious ceremonies and other activities. A tribal council of men made important decisions. Their rules were enforced by several civil chiefs. These were the leaders of the clans, and the office was passed from father to oldest son. The tribe also had war chiefs who led the warriors in battle. Only men who were skillful and daring fighters won that highly honored title. No one became a war chief because his father was one. When a baby boy was born, his parents marked his forehead with a small white or black dot. This meant that he belonged to one of two groups that competed with each other in games and contests of skill. Another quote on the right side there, everybody. I liked my towns and my cornfields and the homes of my people. I fought for it. It is now yours. Keep it as we did. It will produce good crops. Chief Blackhawk at Fort Madison, July 4th, 1838. So, everybody, this is kind of part one, providing some background on the Native American tribes. Part two is going to be about the troubled times that these Native American groups started to encounter as white settlers moved west. So, please watch part two, and then you'll watch that other video that is about one of the last tribes